This is my interview with JamesArzente, who is an artist and a photographer. How you doing?
Hey, fine, thanks. Hey, welcome to the studio.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
My first question is, how did you decide to become an artist, and when did you decide that?
Probably my senior year of college. I took a painting class. The painting instructor, Peter Johnson, was sort of a bizarre character. He was great for me. After taking history and history professors, an art teacher was a breath of fresh air. I took my life drawing classes, all the basics with him.
And what medium did you start with?
Started with oil. I have switched over to acrylic due to health reasons. But I miss the sensuousness that you have with oil paint.
Have you decided what colors you want to use before you start?
There's only one particular color that gets used consistently, and that's a sort of an aqua turquoise, which to me represents the Mediterranean Sea, which has always been an escape for me. Living in southern France for 10 years, that has left a profound influence on my work.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about the kidney transplant.
I had the transplant done here in Seattle. Before I flew out here, I was sort of panicky. I was asking him, you know, how long are my kidneys going to last? But he looked at me, Ted Steinman, and said, "You've got about 4 years." And I was sort of floored. I thought, wow, that's great, 4 years. That means I can get a lot of work done before things go south quickly. My kidneys failed in starting May of last year. The end of May, I received a phone call out of the blue. I was eligible. They needed a blood sample. On Saturday morning, I went in early, gave them a blood sample. By Saturday evening, they called me at 6:30. Sunday, I went in and had the transplant. So it happened within 3 days, and 4 days later, I walked out of the hospital. And
wow. I've
been feeling absolutely phenomenal since then. This gentleman was in a car accident, a 21-year-old, over Memorial Day weekend, at the beginning of Memorial Day weekend. Head trauma, and his parents donated every organ that they could of his child, which is a heavy decision. That person's organ saved 13 people, their life.
Wow.
Gave me a totally different life to be able to work on this book project, to be able to finish paintings, to be able to see my daughter graduate. Just that one gift. And it's extremely important that people think about donating an organ. I mean, I have one great kidney, and that's basically all you need. I mean, all my levels are incredible. They haven't been this good in, 15 years. So, of course, I'm psyched.
So, in your bio, you talk about using photography as source material for art. And I know that you combine painting and photographic images together. So, talk about that a little bit.
Early on, I was a landscape painter. Because the person who I worked with early on, Peter Johnson, was a Cezanne nut. And he would track off, and we would track off into the New Hampshire landscape and paint. There's a lot of rock formations in New Hampshire. And we would paint these rocks constantly. Forms, shadows, lights. That's where I learned to paint, was out in the open air. I was always an Alfred Hitchcock nut. From growing up watching those black and white, the TV show every week, to his movies. It's great use of shadow, especially in the black and white. How the lines developed into the work was always this sterileness that sometimes painting surfaces have. And I wanted some type of texture. I wanted to show that there was some type of hand involved in that, which was important. So hence the scratching started to come in to the surface of the piece.
But the stripes and the lines are significant to you, correct?
The influences of those stripes came from the French louvered windows you see in the, all the French houses, have those louvers, which really attracted me. I always loved them. I always loved the way the light came in through those and cast the shadows on the ground. You got this dark and white, dark and white, dark and white. And I always wanted to be able to see how you can contrast those shapes.
When you shoot, does this change your perspective when you're looking through a lens?
No. A lot of what I do in terms of photography has to do with the use of space. Because a lot of times when I photograph the artist in their studio, a lot of it has to do with how the angles line up in terms of a door being a flat surface with a floor, how those work within that lens frame, where the placement is. And once again, the use of Alfred Hitchcock in his color along with Vermeer, because I like the way Vermeer showed the highlights of that face, and his shadows are also very important. But it's a combination of Vermeer and Alfred Hitchcock into those photographs, which to me are an important aspect of how I want to portray the people I'm portraying on that other side. In terms of this photography project that was started in Boston and continuing here, has been enlightening for me, because I don't research the people I'm going to photograph. They don't know me, I don't know them. It all comes down to, we sit down first, we have a cup of coffee, and we get to know each other. You see the way they eat, you see the way they drink their coffee, you see the way they want their coffee made, how they do it. You learn a lot from people in food and how they interact with their food. And at the end, we're both artists, we both work together, we come up with a final image, and the project itself is done.
Now, speaking of food,
yes.
I asked you what your request today was for food, and you wanted a meatball sub.
My background is Italian on my mother's and father's side, so what better than a meatball sub? The combination of ingredients you use shows me in terms of your creativity. I mean, that whole bag that you brought in terms of meatballs was the whole study itself. I could have photographed just the bag and done it as an installation piece.
Lived in France for 10 years?
Yes.
And how did you end up there?
One of the things I did when I was in New Hampshire was able to write grants for an artist colony in southern New Hampshire called McDowell Colony. Worked there for 2 years writing grants for them. The woman who was there, who was the director at the time, was Nancy Englander. She eventually went to the Getty to head the Getty. She was able to get me a job being a director of an art colony in southern France called the Caroly Foundation. That's how I ended up in France. You know, I'm in my young 20s, early 20s, no overhead. You can be as bohemian as you want. You have the ideas of all these writers that have gone and all the musicians and painters who've always gone to Paris and made their thing, which I was swept up in the romance of the whole thing, so I was doing it. And then eventually heading down to a little town called Aix-sur-Mer. I lived there for 6 years in Aix and painted. That's left a profound mark on my whole life.
How do you compare the Boston art scene to the Seattle art scene?
The visual artists, Seattle tends to be much more figurative in terms of its work, very much less abstract work. That is one large difference in terms of the art markets here. East Coast is very influenced, Boston is very influenced in the shadow of New York. In Boston, if you haven't shown in New York, you haven't made it, even though you're shown in Boston. Here, I think it's LA. I think if you haven't shown in LA, you could just be shown in Seattle, but you need to hit the different market. And LA and New York are probably some of the two largest centers. I think both of those cities have extremely great museums. The lack of a real world-class museum, and I'm not putting Seattle Art Museum down at all. I used to like going to the MFA and walking through areas that I would never normally see, getting ideas and inspiration. Well, I can't do that here. So I'll be able to see the mechanics of what that artist went through that I can learn. There is no museum school here for the arts. Is there a lot of great talent here? Yes. Mm-hmm. So those are some of the aspects that I find different.
I want to talk about the book project. Did you start this project in Boston?
Yes. The book originally started out as a guide for younger artists. It was going to be involved with interviewing mid-career visual artists only. Very limited when I think about it. But that's what I wanted to do. I was a painter. I felt comfortable talking with other painters, especially being my age. I wanted to meet people from their 40s up to 60s.
So how many artists have you interviewed?
I have interviewed close to about 40 different artists. The focus of the book has changed from being this sort of guide for younger artists as now a project with photographing artists of different disciplines. I view it as a circus. I really literally view it as a Fellini movie. So eventually what I want to do is do the books, do the photos, put all these people together into groups to create separate artwork. You know, mixing up 3 people that don't know each other of 3 different disciplines to come up with a project together. Strangers working together.
Or that Adam and Eve theme.
Yeah, the Adam and Eve thing in terms of having males and female represent Eve. Bring them together, put it into a show so that there's a month long of static pieces. So there'll be photos on the wall, 3-dimensional pieces in there, poets reading, performance artists, and one of the pieces that I want to do, the human jungle, a choir of screaming. It'd be a woman in a beach chair with a blue striped bathing suit on, reading Baudelaire, and in front of them on a mound of sand, and in front of her would be these performance artists acting like they were people on the beach, you know. So you got 3 layers: the choir, the woman on the beach chair, and then these people moving across her front as she was watching the water. And they'd be moving extremely slow in motion. That's the beauty of performance artists and dancers. They can do that stuff. So you have the screaming, the woman trying to relax, and these slow motion people going down there. And that would happen. You'd have the screaming, that would fade out. The dancers would sort of go down into the sand, and then she would just read a passage from Baudelaire in French. And then the screaming would stop, they'd go up, and they'd go across the stage. That would happen 3 times. At the end, the choir is gone, the performance artists are gone. The only one left is the woman in the beach chair. She reads her last passage in English, closes the book, puts it on her stomach, it's quiet, the lights go down, it's the end of the piece. Great.
James, thank you so much for
You're
the
welcome.
interview.
That was fun.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Thank you.